We have only explored 5% of the ocean so far. Even this info alone should be enough to make people scared of getting lost in the ocean. On the other part of the spectrum, there are deserts. You need to be in survival mode there too. Shockingly, more people lose their lives from drowning than dehydration in the desert. But what's worse? Being trapped at sea without food, or getting lost in a desert? Being lost at sea is tougher for a bunch of reasons. There's no hiding from the sun during the day, freezing temperatures at night, and gusty winds most of the time. You're at the mercy of the sea, and depending on where you are, you might be dealing with massive 40-foot-tall ocean swells. In places like the North Atlantic, staying afloat in the water is a struggle that lasts less than a minute. In wild seas, controlling your ride is a challenge. Capsizing or drifting in a random direction are real risks. The odds of a passing ship spotting and rescuing you are pretty slim unless you're floating in the area where a busy shipping route lies. You might think you can catch some fish, but the ocean might be 3 to 5 miles deep in many places, and marine inhabitants are likely to swim way below the surface. Catching them will require special gear. And even if you manage to catch something, you will still have no equipment to cook it. Surviving over a year adrift at sea might sound wild, but experts say it's doable with a bit of luck. One fisherman is living proof of this theory. He was rescued after more than a year of being lost at sea. Jose Alvarenga claimed he had set sail from Mexico in 2012, got carried off, and somehow ended up 5,000 miles away at the Marshall Islands. When he was found, his face was covered with a bushy beard. He had survived by catching fish, birds, and turtles with his bare hands. In tropical waters, having fresh water, staying afloat on a boat or raft, and having shelter from the sun, some food, and a signaling device are crucial. Having a 24-foot-long boat and a tarp played a big role in Alvarenga's survival. Generally, 5 to 6 weeks without food is the human limit. Catching birds and fish by hand is tricky, but if done cleverly, it might work out. Smaller turtles can be captured and tossed into the boat, providing fresh meat and preventing scurvy. In open waters, most turtles, birds, and fish are safe to eat raw. Marine toxins in fish are relatively uncommon. It's not that risky. Water is vital too. Rain, bird, and turtle blood, as well as their meat, which is high in water content, might help. In tropical environments, the main dangers are heat, solar radiation, dehydration, skin issues, and animal attacks. Alvarenga seemed confused at times because sun exposure, dehydration, and vitamin deficiencies can affect mental state too. As for the desert, it seems to be easier to survive there. There are plants, lizards, and snakes you can munch on. You can stay in the shade during the scorching day and move around when it's cooler, in the evening and morning. We tend to think of the desert as a hot, dry expanse of land, but it can get cold at night. So get ready to build a fire. Starting a fire at night will keep you warm and make it easier for rescuers to spot you if you're lost. Sage and dry bushes make excellent fire starters, so do dry animal droppings. The key to surviving in the desert is conserving water. Focus on maintaining a normal body temperature and keeping your skin shaded from the sun. Find shelter in the shade that allows for a nice breeze. Avoid strolling around under the sun. Skip the drink cactus water myth. That might do more harm than good. The liquid inside cacti is toxic. Even if exhaustion tempts you to lie down, steer clear of the ground if you can. It can be 30 degrees hotter than the air temperature. If you have your car with you, take out the seats and put them on the ground in the shade. Try to figure out what can serve as a decent seat. Aim to keep at least 1.5 feet between you and the ground. Shedding clothes might seem like a good idea when the sun is blazing, but it's risky. Exposing your skin to the sun will lead to sunburn and speed up dehydration. Instead, cover up as much of your body as you can and stay away from direct sunlight. One of the major dangers in the desert is flash floods. Ditches, arroyos, and canyons can fill up with water quickly, catching you off guard. Remember, more people have lost their lives from drowning than dehydration in the desert. Stick to high ground and avoid areas that could spell disaster during a heavy downpour. In northern Africa, you can take part in the Marathon des Sables. It's a grueling run that's more than 6 times longer than a regular marathon, and it all happens in the heart of the desert. Mauro, an Italian police officer, decided to join the race in 1994. A sandstorm struck at a certain point along the route, leaving Mauro disoriented. Losing his sense of direction, he ran in the wrong direction. He covered several dozen miles before realizing the gravity of his situation. Eventually, he sought refuge in an abandoned shrine in the middle of nowhere. Survival mode kicked in. He summoned the strength for one last dash through the desert, hoping to find help. After being lost for a whole week, he finally stumbled upon an oasis with a little water puddle. But his throat and mouth were so swollen from dehydration that he couldn't swallow much of the water. He was just lying there next to the puddle, taking tiny sips throughout the day. The next morning, he managed to fill up his water container and kept on walking. Later, he spotted some fresh goat marks, and that got his attention. Along the trail, he found human footprints. It turned out to be a young girl who was taking care of the goats. When Mauro sprinted towards her, desperately asking for help, he freaked her out at first, but then he finally got rescued. And now let's talk about surviving on a deserted island. There, you have more chances than in the ocean or desert. You can boost your luck by following these steps. Look for freshwater sources, such as streams, waterfalls, or rain. If the place is dry, create a solar still by digging a hole, placing a container inside, and covering it with plastic. Collect rainwater and boil it before drinking. Avoid salt water from the ocean. The next step is to get food. Try to eat only familiar fruits like coconuts and bananas, and avoid unknown berries. Seaweed will also do you good. It's possible to prevent scurvy by munching on fresh citrus fruits like lemons and oranges. You can get protein from fish, mollusks, and small animals. Sharpen sticks to hunt for fish or birds. Be careful with bigger game and go for slower insects if needed. Cook shellfish thoroughly. Before eating unfamiliar fruits, rub them on your skin and lip to check for adverse reactions. Avoid fruits with a peach or almond smell, as they might be poisonous. Don't waste anything, even if you have extra. Store excess food and water and stick to a plan. I hope you'll never find yourself in this situation. Nelson Neti survived 5 days on a deserted island near Rio de Janeiro. He got caught in a wave while checking out the view from the rocks near Grumari Beach and ended up on Palmas Island. This 51-year-old gardener found a cave to sleep in on the first night and stumbled upon a tent and a blanket left by fishermen the next day. As the days went by, Mr. Neti got desperate and started drinking seawater. Finally, on Saturday, jet skiers spotted him waving his shirt, and they called the authorities. A helicopter came to the rescue, and that's how Mr. Neti got saved.
Hey now, get ready to dive into the Sea of Mysteries, also known as the Black Sea. It is the largest inland body of water in the world, bigger than the entire state of California. It has dozens of lost ships and some secret underwater tunnels. And some people believe it's an ancient quarry that was mined out in 6 stages. The Black Sea has distinct vertical layers that don't mix, with higher and lower salinity. The salty water comes from the Mediterranean, and fresh water comes from rivers. 10 of the largest rivers in Europe flow into the Black Sea. It receives more fresh water from the rivers and rainfall than it loses from evaporation. The extra water flows through the Bosphorus into the Marmara Sea. There are 2 flows going through the straits. The upper flow leaves the Black Sea and takes surface water out of it. The bottom flow carries salt water from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. That's why the upper layers of the Black Sea are less dense than its saltier lower layers. The oxygen that comes from the atmosphere and photosynthesis stays in the surface layers. Everything deeper than about 300 feet in the middle and up to 500 feet near the edge is not fit for life. Only certain bacteria can survive in these conditions. Although there's no air deep down in the Black Sea, the upper layer is home to around 750 species of phytoplankton. Eggs and larvae of fish and invertebrates chill in coastal regions. There are also 180 fish species in the Black Sea, and some of them are valuable, such as horse mackerel, spiny dogfish, and sprat. The water level in the Black Sea is always the same because there are no high or low tides, so the sea is always calm, quiet, and serene on the surface. But it has one surprise feature: an underwater river. It's a current of salty water flowing through the Bosphorus Strait and along the seabed. This amazing discovery was made by scientists from the University of Leeds and was announced in 2010. It's the first undersea river of its kind ever found. The river forms because salty water from the Mediterranean Sea spills through the Bosphorus Strait into the Black Sea, where the water is much less salty. The no-air zone of the sea is an ideal conservation chamber for what's hiding on its bottom. The Black Sea is like a treasure trove for shipwrecks, and we discovered it by accident. Some maritime archaeologists were studying sea levels to see how quickly the water levels rose after the last ice age, and they ran across over 40 previously unknown shipwrecks as a complete bonus. Researchers used 2 remotely operated vehicles to explore the seafloor and the wrecks. Thanks to it, we have a video and detailed 3D images of the ships that were stitched together from thousands of high-resolution photos. According to the New York Times, some of the standout discoveries among the 44 ships found include a medieval training vessel from the 13th or 14th century. Expedition members nicknamed another ship from the Ottoman Empire the Flower of the Black Sea for its beautiful petal carvings. The team also noticed unusual details on other ships, like coiled ropes, chisel marks, rudders, and other carvings. So far, they haven't announced any plans to excavate the shipwrecks, but the ships might be filled with historical treasures like books, parchments, and documents. It's worth a try to rescue them. The most extraordinary discovery in the Black Sea is what archaeologists believe to be the world's oldest intact shipwreck. It has been lying undisturbed for over 2,400 years. This ancient Greek vessel, 75 feet long, was found with its mast, rudders, and rowing benches all still in place, over a mile beneath the surface. Researchers believe the ship was a trading vessel, like those depicted on ancient Greek pottery, such as the Siren vase in the British Museum. This vase, or vase, dating from the same period, shows a vessel carrying Odysseus past the Sirens. The team took a small piece for carbon dating, and the results confirmed it as the oldest intact shipwreck known to humankind. The fact that it's so elaborate and well-preserved deserves a standing ovation for shipbuilders of the ancient world. Without microbes, worms, or other creatures to eat away the wrecks, it's no wonder the ships are in almost perfect condition. If the Titanic had sunk in these waters, we would have found it in a much better state now, not being eaten by nasty underwater microorganisms. Now, there's an interesting theory called the Black Sea deluge hypothesis, which suggests a huge flood happened around 7,500 years ago. 2 geologists in the 1990s suggested that at the end of the last ice age, when the Earth's climate was heating up, ice sheets were melting and sea levels were rising. The Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake. It was separated from the Mediterranean Sea by a natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. As global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean overflowed into the Black Sea basin. They suggest the sea level rose by 6 inches every day, flooded coastal settlements, and changed the environment for good. Samples from the Black Sea floor show a sudden shift from freshwater to marine species around that time, which means there was a rapid influx of salt water. Underwater surveys have also found what look like the old shorelines and human-made structures. So, people were living in areas now submerged by the Black Sea. Plus, the timing of this flood matches up with known patterns of human migration into Europe, Asia, and Africa. They also say this flood could be the terrible flood from the story of Noah's Ark. Critics of the deluge theory say the evidence isn't as straightforward as it seems. Some think the transition from freshwater to saltwater in the Black Sea was more gradual than one sudden flood. They're also debating if people left the settlements before they went underwater or as a result. An old chronicle that's been around for about a century says there were two underground tunnels starting in what is now Romania and Bulgaria and stretching all the way under the Black Sea to Turkey. Back in the day, peasants used these tunnels to move their flocks of sheep to the Ottoman Empire and countries on the Asia Minor Peninsula. Who built these tunnels and why they run under the sea is a complete mystery. At some point, the entrances to these tunnels were sealed off for national security and were under tight guard. The security forces knew all about these massive tunnels and kept them off limits. In the 1980s, a group of people working on the Danube-Black Sea Canal accidentally found another entrance to these mysterious tunnels. This one was in a cemetery in a town of Romania. Canal workers used it to regularly cross over into Bulgaria. One more cool thing about these two tunnels is that some people think they were built thousands of years ago. If you ever try to dig a tunnel under the sea, you'll know how tricky it is even now with all the tech we have. So if the tunnels are really that old, whoever built them was super advanced for their time. Now, there's an urban legend that says that the Black Sea has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle. Fishers describe some wild whirlpool that appears out of nowhere and drags entire flocks of birds, ships, and even small islands under the sea. And once, things got even wilder with a ship that vanished under weird conditions in 1944. It was during daylight, and some black fog with green flashing sparkles suddenly surrounded the vessel. No one has ever seen it since, and no one knows for sure if the story is true. But it sure adds a spooky touch to the mysteries of the Black Sea. So, a mysterious discovery was made deep in the Red Sea, the so-called death pools. Woo, that's scary. In 2020, researchers embarked on a dive into the Red Sea. The mission spot was in the Gulf of Aqaba, between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Near the end of their expedition, as they ventured deeper into the darkening waters, they noticed some strange seaweed floating above the seafloor. They decided to use a remotely operated vehicle and investigate it. Suddenly, they discovered these strange, motionless lakes of water within the sea. These are called brine pools. They're basically pockets of salty water deep on the ocean floor. And when I say salty, I mean it. Sometimes they're up to 8 times saltier than the ocean water itself. Mysteriously, they don't mix well with the surroundings. They formed millions of years ago, sometime during the Miocene epoch, back when weird creatures roamed the earth, like me, and deeply buried mineral deposits dissolved into the water. The largest pool spans about 170,000 square feet. Meanwhile, 3 smaller ones are under 107 square feet each. At first, this discovery didn't seem that scary. But here's why they're so horrifying. Not only are they disgustingly salty, they also lack oxygen. Now hold on a sec, isn't that normal for something that's underwater? Well, it turns out the Earth's waters are full of oxygen, and at least half of this element on our planet comes from the oceans. Just like plants on land, marine plants such as phytoplankton, seaweed, and algae munch on sunlight and produce oxygen through photosynthesis. They release lots of it into the surroundings. Marine life then eats half of it, so only about a quarter of the oxygen that we breathe actually comes from the oceans. Just like us, sea creatures need this element to survive. Without it, they can't breathe and support their metabolism to live. That's why these pools are super dangerous for most of them. It's like a puddle of thick syrup for bugs. When they get in, the poor things immediately suffocate and pass away. Which is why the pools are surrounded by a graveyard of marine animals. But let's see how these things can exist in the first place. Have you ever tried making ice cubes from salty water? Spoiler, it's pretty hard. When you add salt, the water gets harder than usual to freeze, a phenomenon that has a funny name, freezing point depression. Oh, that's because salt interferes with the hydrogen bonds between water molecules. As it finally freezes, stuff like particles, dirt, or dissolved salts get pushed out to the sides. As a result, the salt's kind of squeezed out of the ice crystals and gets trapped near the edges in small bubbles or pockets. Something similar happens in the ocean when seawater starts freezing under super cold polar caps. The salt doesn't freeze with the water. Instead, it gets pushed out, forming a super salty cold liquid, the brine. And then it sinks down to the ocean floor. On a large scale, all this process also helps currents to form. Despite being so dangerous, the pools are still full of microbial life because microbes couldn't care less, they'll survive anywhere. There are literally thick mats of them in the brines. There are also some salt-loving creatures, like shrimps and eels, hovering around the pool's edges. They're being super creepy, waiting to catch unsuspecting prey that ventures too close to the toxic death pool. Ew. Well, it sounds icky, I know. But this discovery gives us some fascinating insights into how life might have originated on Earth. We already know from the evolution theory that we came from the ocean, but now scientists think that life might have begun in the deep sea in some super dark, oxygen-free places. These brine pools are like time capsules. They're one of the closest things we found to the early Earth. They can tell us the planet's history of earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and more. For example, they have some traces of rainfall that happened over 1,000 years ago. And they can also help us search for life on other water-rich planets. For example, Mars most likely used to have huge oceans on it. Now, NASA scientists want to send a special instrument called HABIT for a special red planet mission to study things similar to our brine pools. This will tell us more about how life appears and survives in the universe. There is lots of unexplored fascinating stuff like this in the Red Sea. That's why scientists conducted the so-called Decade Expedition and spent around 5 months exploring the place. This expedition was launched by the National Center for Wildlife. They made so many remarkable discoveries that now we've got 77 new research papers. For example, they found over 10 blue holes, incredible underwater sinkholes that host unique ecosystems. They also learned that dolphins can use those blue holes to protect their young from predators. Scientists also found traces of great white sharks, a creepy community of deep-sea lanternfish living in low oxygen conditions, and even a new coral species. It's the most resilient deep-sea corals that also vibe just fine without oxygen, like microbes we mentioned. Speaking of which, research also showed us some new ancient thermal vents and large blobs of microbial formations near Farasand Island. Now, can you believe that with all that, we only explored 5% of the ocean? It's divided into several layers based on depth. Each layer becomes darker and more isolated from sunlight as we go deeper. The places that no sunlight can reach are terrifying. Now, the fun, cute layer with dolphins and turtles is called the epipelagic or sunlight zone. It's so tiny, but even this layer is about 650 feet deep. Then we have the mesopelagic or twilight zone. It's the layer of mysterious octopus, shark, and other loners, which extend to about 3,000 feet down. And then the horrors begin after this one. We encounter the bathypelagic or midnight zone. It extends to 13,000 feet below the surface, about a half of Everest above you. Here we have the famous poor blobfish, squids, and anglerfish. Below it is the abyssal zone. It extends to about 20,000 feet deep. Since there's not much sunlight or oxygen, as we mentioned, most creatures here are quite small, like tube worms and shrimp. The darkness continues until we arrive at the scariest place of the planet, the place full of trenches formed by tectonic plate movements, the Hadal Zone. It's named after Hades, the deity of the underworld in Greek mythology. Just like Hades' realm is dark, remote, and guarded, the Hadal Zone is the deepest and most depressing part of the ocean. It starts at depths of around 20,000 feet and can go down to 36,000 feet and more. The famous Mariana Trench also belongs to this zone. Only 3 people in history have ever explored these depths in person, making it one of the least explored and most mysterious places on our planet. However, despite crazy high pressure, near freezing temperatures, and complete darkness, there are still things who manage to survive here. Guys like amphipods, which are critters who feed on dead material sinking from above, and the Hadal snailfish, which lives as deep as 27,000 feet. So scientists used to assume that if there's no sunlight, there wouldn't be that much oxygen around. But one day, a research team decided to measure the levels of oxygen in one of those deep zones. Surprisingly, the levels were super high. They checked the equipment thinking that it was malfunctioning, but nope, All the sensors showed the same thing. Turns out the oxygen was somehow generated by rocks. These small potato-sized rocks on the seafloor are called polymetallic nodules. They're rich in metals like copper, nickel, and cobalt, and they're basically like small batteries. When you put a battery in salt water, it can produce bubbles of gas, a process called electrolysis. In the same way, these rocks create tiny electric currents, which are powerful enough to produce the same gases, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. It's the first time we saw oxygen being produced by some non-living minerals. This is what scientists now call dark oxygen. It turned out that about half of large marine species, or megafauna, were living just on dark oxygen alone. All these discoveries are reshaping our understanding of where and how life could evolve. It means that we might be able to find life on other planets or satellites with low oxygen conditions, like Enceladus and Europa, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and they have large bodies of frozen water on them. Wow!
If you're a fan of Dr. Pimple Popper, you're probably freaking out right now, itching to squeeze out every little blackhead from those lip contours. But this is actually a hill formation that you can find in Garb, Sudan. Knowing that perhaps makes it all the more creepy because it looks like the crack in the middle is swallowing up everything around it. This black hole scenario brings to mind our next stop, Vostok Island. This eerie spot is a 59-acre coral atoll situated in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, about 400 miles northwest of Tahiti. If you check it out on Google Earth today, it looks like it's been totally blacked out, sparking all sorts of wild theories. People keep saying that this place is some top-secret base, or even a fictional island straight out of Lost. But what we see here is actually just a dense, dark green forest made up of Pisonia trees. Since nobody lives there and hardly anyone ever visits, the island is pretty much untouched by humans. This massive star, or mandala, is situated just outside Beatty, Nevada. It has got the internet all puzzled, with people trying to figure out if it's evidence of some kind of extraterrestrial activity. To add to the mystery, this spot is right by the Tonopah Test Range, which is also known as the famous Area 52. Despite its creepiness, it's probably just one of the thousands of crop circles that gained fame after Google Earth came along. This spiral formation right here is also located in Nevada, and it definitely looks like another chilling crop circle. But things get even stranger if you use the Street View option. As you zoom in closer and closer, you'll notice that it's made up of carefully arranged rocks. This labyrinth, so to speak, is part of an open-air museum situated in the ghost town of Rhyolite. And if that's not creepy enough, take a look around, and you'll see dozens of eerie men in white cloaks. Despite their lifelike appearance, these silhouettes are actually statues from an installation created by a Belgian artist in the 80s. Even stranger than stumbling upon a large circle on the ground is finding a bunch of them. Our next location in Wyoming is filled with peculiar circle structures to the point where it's hard to count them all. During the 20th century, this U.S. state shifted from a farming economy to an industrial one, dominated by the extraction of oil, gas, and coal. So, these circles are likely remnants of a tank farm. I mean, places where oil storage tanks used to be located. If you want to avoid nightmares, I highly recommend not searching for the mausoleum of Emil Becker in Poland. If you happen to find it by using the Street View mode, prepare yourself to face an abandoned place with the most terrifying sculpture there is. Oh, the creeps. Keeping on the spooky side, let's head to an isolated corner of Kazakhstan, where you can find a pentagram etched into the Earth's surface. This formation is huge, measuring roughly 1,200 feet in diameter. Before you jump to conclusions about this formation being related to some kind of underworld deity worship, it's worth noting that the pentagram actually turns out to be the outline of a park designed in the shape of a star. The star shape is marked by roadways, which are now lined with trees, making the star shape even more distinct in aerial photos. You can spot this peculiar symbol from quite a distance. At first glance, it might even resemble an otherworldly alphabet, as if a highly intelligent civilization is trying to send us an alert message. But this mystery is already solved. We are in De Hoge Veluwe, a Dutch national park located in the province of Gelderland. And these lines are actually part of the park's logo. Search for these coordinates to find what looks like a land formation straight out of an extraterrestrial landscape, or perhaps a set from Avatar. This place, located in Inner Mongolia, China, is believed to be a granite mine. But it's a bit of a mystery why it has such a striking blue tone on Google Earth. If you check it out on Microsoft Bing Maps, for example, the same location appears in a much more natural tone. In the Australian outback lies a massive geoglyph known as the Maori Man. Discovered in the late 90s, it appears to represent an indigenous Australian man hunting with a boomerang or stick. The figure stretches for more than 2 miles in length and about 1.6 miles wide. It has deep furrows carved into the ground, which adds to the complexity of its formation and origin. Despite efforts to uncover its purpose, its origin is still a mystery. This is Desert Breath, located in the Sahara. Like many things you have seen in this video, this formation also sparks speculation about it being created by extraterrestrial beings. But a quick Google search clears up that mystery. It turns out this is an art installation created by a group of 3 Greek artists back in 1997. They went all out, moving around a whopping 280,000 square feet of sand and even creating a large pool in the middle of it. Egypt still holds many mysteries, and you can explore them yourself with Google Earth. That's how some people stumbled upon this striking triangular-shaped plateau and immediately jumped to the conclusion that they discovered a hidden pyramid. However, experts quickly dashed their hopes. They believe there's no plausible explanation for a pyramid to exist in this area, located 8 miles west of the Nile Valley edge in Upper Egypt. This discovery is likely nothing more than a hill that has suffered the effects of erosion, combined with a heavy dose of wishful thinking. In some cases, nature itself is responsible for creating frightening sculptures, like the Badlands Guardian in Alberta, Canada. If you look at it from above, you'll notice not 1, but 2 human heads emerging from the landscape. These gigantic beings were sculpted by rainwater erosion on layers of clay-rich soil. Ironically, additional human-made structures give the impression that this one is wearing wired headphones. It seems that deserts are a prime spot for discovering strange images on Google Earth. So our next stop is China. In the Gobi Desert, you'll come across zigzagging white lines that look kind of random. The first challenge for armchair experts was figuring out what these structures were made of, as it's hard to tell if they're painted on or dug into the landscape. There's still a lot of speculation about it on the internet. But the most plausible explanation is that this structure is used for calibrating satellites. This way, satellite cameras can focus on these large grids to orient themselves in space. Check out this intact plane that seems to have sunk beneath the ocean off the coast of Crooked Island, Bahamas. Some viral videos claim it's a crashed plane belonging to the infamous Pablo Escobar. The truth is that something lying on the bottom of the ocean can't be that visible, so it's more likely that it's a plane that was actually flying when Google captured these images. However, there is a strong belief that Pablo Escobar did have a plane that crashed nearby, but it was in another part of the Bahamas known as Norman's Cay. You can still spot it in shallow turquoise waters. Just search for Norman's Cay sunken plane, and there it is. If you're convinced that extraterrestrials are already among us, then go ahead and type in these coordinates on Google Earth. Explore the area using Street View, and wow, what is it? Of course, we're not talking about visitors from other planets, but this shadow of a gigantic creature still gives me the creeps. Turns out, it's just a person lugging around one of those 360-degree Street View cameras tucked away in a trekker backpack. So hey, if you take a good look around Google Earth, you might stumble upon more of these elongated necked beings walking around the globe. They say it's safer to get someone on the International Space Station than to evacuate someone from Antarctica in the winter in case of an emergency. So if you're wondering what it's like to be an astronaut but aren't ready to leave the Earth, consider the career of an Antarctica explorer. The desert conditions around the South Pole are much like those on Mars. The lowest temperature ever recorded here was almost minus 129 degrees Fahrenheit. You can find more meteorites here than anywhere else on Earth. Plus, there isn't any sunlight here for 6 months every year, just like in space all the time. So, NASA scientists use this land to test their space robots, to design the best astronaut meal plans, and to know what it would feel like to fly to another planet in complete isolation. The first people came here to stay on purpose for the whole winter in 1899. All 10 of them lived in a small cabin made of pine wood that was only about the size of 2 bedrooms. The windows were boarded up, and the roof was covered in sealskins. Heavy coal held it down to stop the wind from blowing it away. Even though it was tough, all the men survived except for one. More than 100 years later, the little hut is still standing and is the oldest building in Antarctica. Today, Antarctica has over 40 research stations that are open all year, and about 60 more that are used only during the warmer months. In the summer, up to 5,000 people live here doing their research. The places where they stay are much more comfortable than they used to be. No need for sealskins anymore. Belgium's futuristic Princess Elizabeth Station stays warm using sunlight and heat from people and electrical appliances. It's covered in shiny metal and built on strong rocks, with walls that are more than 1.5 feet thick. These walls have 9 layers of different materials like wool, paper, and wood. The temperature inside stays at a comfy 68 degrees, even when it's freezing at minus 58 outside. The eco-friendly station uses wind turbines and solar panels for power, and it makes more energy than it really needs. Brazil's Comandante Ferraz station is divided into 3 levels, kinda like a themed hotel. The top part is 30 feet tall and has bedrooms, restaurants, and other facilities to live comfortably. The middle part, which is almost 20 feet tall, is used for science experiments and maintenance. The lowest part, about 8 feet high, is where they store things and park vehicles. It also has video conference rooms, libraries, and living rooms. The station's height can be adjusted depending on the temperature and melting ice, so it stays safe and comfy for the people living there. This design also helps to minimize the impact on all the wildlife around it. Another interesting station is Britain's Halley 6 Antarctic Research Station, which looks like a robot from Star Wars. It's made up of 8 separate sections. The station sits on tall legs that allow the wind to blow the snow away. This way, it isn't stuck to the ground. The bottom is shaped like sleds, so they can move the station around when needed. This is important because it sits on a huge moving glacier, which slowly pushes it towards the sea. The station sleds let it be moved back regularly for important studies, like observing the atmosphere. This is the first research station that can be fully moved like this. Some scientists don't stay at research stations, but live in tents on the ice for days. They spend around half of the time trapped inside because the wind blows some serious amounts of snow on the tents and blocks the exit. They say it feels like exploring space. One earthly question, though, is how they use the bathroom while out exploring in Antarctica and not at a research station. There aren't any real bathrooms unless you bring or make one. Some explorers use a special tent just for that, or build snow walls or igloos for privacy. All waste has to go with them when they get back to the research station. You can't just leave the waste in the wild there, according to the Antarctic Treaty System that regulates all human activities. It could harm the local environment. So, at the end of the season, they send it back to their home country in special containers. So nothing stays in Antarctica. Each research station gets its fresh water in different ways. In the past, people had to shovel snow and ice into big tanks and then heat it up to melt it into water. Now they mostly pump water from a lake that forms when ice melts and store it in a heated building. On average, one station needs about between 2,500 and 4,000 gallons of water every day. To save water, people can only take 3-minute showers. When water is running low, they might only be allowed to shower every second or third day. Building new constructions in Antarctica isn't exactly easy because of snow that can pile up as high as a 1-story building, super strong winds blowing at 85 miles per hour with even faster gusts, and temperatures dropping really low. The weather only allows transportation for about 12 weeks each summer, so some stations take years to finish. Storing everything once it arrives is tricky too, because there's not much space and the weather is extreme. Most materials stay in their shipping containers, and for things that need to stay warm, they bring special heated storage containers. So, architects have to get creative with designs and try to use less building material. India's Baradi polar base, for example, is made from 134 shipping containers. These containers were used to bring the materials to Antarctica, and then they became part of the building itself, covered with a special insulated shell to keep it warm. In the future, scientists might build Antarctic bases that don't need much material from outside at all. In 2009, David Garcia from a Danish company had a cool idea called the Iceberg Living Station. This would be a base with many rooms, big enough for 100 people, dug right out of the packed snow or icebergs that have broken off from the ice shelf. A group of scientists from different countries spent 26 weeks together in the Rothera Research Station. Among them were a couple of Americans, an Icelandic mechanic, a few Germans, some Scots, and a Welsh speaker. They rarely had a chance to contact their loved ones back home because it was too expensive to call on the satellite phone. With just each other for company and not many things to do for fun, they talked a lot, during work, breaks, and while playing pool. They discussed everything, mostly weather, like the wild weather and icebergs. They all used English for communication. Over time, their accents started to change. They didn't notice it at first, but they were part of an experiment where they recorded their voices regularly. They would say the same 29 basic words, like food and coffee. When the recordings were sent to a team in Germany, they found that some of the words were pronounced differently. It was clear that a new accent was starting to form. They started to pronounce the OU sounds in words such as flow and disco differently. We normally pronounce it from the back of the throat, and in their case, it shifted to the front of the mouth. 6 months isn't such a long time when it comes to language changes, but such things happen when people are cut off from others. When they talk to each other a lot, they remember how the other person sounds and start copying it without even realizing it. This could help us understand why American and British English became so different. The people on the Mayflower were in similar circumstances. They were isolated when they traveled to North America. If you want to speak like an Antarctic winterer, here's some of their slang you can quickly learn. Fodplod means picking up rubbish. Fod stands for foreign object debris. If someone tells you it's a dingle day today, they mean the skies are clear blue. A smoko is a tea or coffee break. Gonk means sleep. And my absolute favorite is fox hat. It means the base cinema night. You know how they say it's better to just hand over your wallet if you run into a mugger? Instead of surrendering their wallets, sea cucumbers choose to spit out some of their insides to fend off predators like crabs and fish. It's a natural defense mechanism for them, and they quickly grow those organs back in just a few days, thanks to special cells inside their bodies. It's not the only weird thing sea cucumbers do. They can actually breathe through their rear end. They have this thing called a respiratory tree that connects to their backside and sits right next to their intestines. So when they suck in water from their behind, it goes into that respiratory tree, letting them absorb oxygen directly into their fluids. Plus, sea cucumbers are the janitors of the ocean. They munch on whatever gets stuck in the sand on the ocean floor. Once they've eaten, they manage to clean out the sand, leaving it nice and tidy after they do their business. As for the clean sand, the stunning white sand beaches in Hawaii are actually a product of parrotfish number 2. These fish munch on algae from rocks and dead corals, and while they're chomping away, they also grind up the leftover bits of coral in their bellies. When they're done, they move their bowels, and voila! It all comes out as beautiful sand. Not only do they play a vital role in keeping the coral reef ecosystem healthy, but they can churn out hundreds of pounds of this white sand every year. Marine animals are seriously impressive when it comes to holding their breath. Just look at sperm whales and elephant seals. They can stay underwater for a mind-blowing 2 hours. Then there's a Cuvier's beaked whale, which holds the crazy record at almost 4 hours underwater. When you compare that to the human record of 24 minutes and 37 seconds held by pro diver Budimir Shobat, it seems pretty insignificant. But what's the marine animal's secret that helps them excel humans this much? Unlike us, these sea creatures have a ton of hemoglobin and myoglobin in their blood and muscles, allowing them to store way more oxygen. When their oxygen runs low, myoglobin steps up and releases even more. Plus, they can tolerate higher levels of CO2, so they don't feel the need to breathe as quickly. There's even a study that found their myoglobin molecules have a unique charge that keeps them from sticking together, which boosts oxygen storage. And on top of all that, they can slow down their heart rate and restrict blood flow to hang out underwater even longer. Rumor has it that about 540 million years ago, a meteor loaded with frozen octopus eggs smashed into Earth. Sounds like a delirium, but some scientists are entertaining a very questionable idea that octopuses and their cephalopod buddies, like squids and cuttlefish, might actually have some extraterrestrial origins. The thing is, cephalopods have extraordinary DNA that doesn't look like any other DNA on our planet. They've got around 33,000 protein-coding genes in their genome, which is way more than what we humans have. A recent study suggests that their evolutionary story shows some odd traits that might hint at a connection to space, like they could be from some super far-off past, or even the future. The researchers went as far as to claim that modern octopuses could be the descendants of these frozen creatures that hitched a ride on comets and splashed down in our oceans. And why octopuses? Well, they really stand out in the animal kingdom. They can use different tools to build their own houses, and they can even solve everyday problems independently of their brain, as 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are in its arms. These traits seem to have just appeared out of nowhere during evolution. They even tossed around another quirky theory. What if an extraterrestrial virus crashed into early squid populations and gave them a crazy boost in evolution, turning them into the octopuses we know today? Anyways, these are just fun speculations without any hard proof. Now, this funky object is an animal, not a rock. It's called sand dollar. Just look at the shape of its shell. Once sand dollars are exposed to the sun, their shells lose their soft, spiny covering and become bleached white. Back in the day, beachcombers thought these shells looked a lot like big silver coins, kind of like the old Spanish dollar that was about the same size. But if you prefer, you can call them sand cakes instead. These quirky creatures have tiny spines on their surface, and they glide along the ocean floor. They use small tube feet that line the grooves on their underside to grab bits of food like plankton and algae, which they then send to their mouths. Inside, they have 5 triangular teeth that help them munch on their meals. In some Georgia folklore, sand dollars are said to represent coins lost by mermaids. Sand dollars have a unique talent for cloning themselves. They can do this for a bunch of reasons, like when a predator comes around. Some species of sand dollar larvae can actually split in half as a defense mechanism. It takes about 24 hours for them to clone themselves, and the new larvae end up being about 2/3 smaller than the original, which helps them hide from danger. Wait, is that a giant sea hot dog racing through the ocean? Sorta. Some scientists have joked that sperm whales seriously resemble enormous hot dogs. These massive creatures can take quick naps, standing up for about 10 to 15 minutes. They only sleep about 7% of the time, mostly between 6 p.m. and midnight. Sperm whales also have a cool ability to retract and extend their eyes, thanks to a thick retractor muscle around them. but they can't actually roll their eyes in their sockets. Plus, they have the most asymmetrical skull of any mammal out there. Oh, and let's not forget, they have the largest brain of any living creature, weighing in at over 9 pounds. Unlike us humans, if dolphins went into full-on snooze, they'd stop breathing and could drown. So they figured out a genius solution. They let only one side of their brain sleep at a time. This means one half stays awake to keep them breathing and watching out for any potential threats. When they snooze, they only close one eye. If their right brain is resting, their left eye is shut, and vice versa. This unique sleep style is called unihemispheric sleep, and it lets them recharge without ever fully losing awareness. On top of that, dolphins might be using corals and sponges like their own little pharmacies. Scientists have seen them rubbing their bodies against specific types of coral and sponges, suggesting they might be treating skin issues. They've even spotted dolphins lining up to take turns at these spots, using corals like Gorgonian coral Rumphella aggregata, leather coral, and some sponges. What's really fascinating is that researchers have analyzed these corals and found they contain compounds that could help with dolphin skin conditions, which can sometimes lead to infections and lesions. Now, the big question is figuring out exactly how each type of coral helps dolphins, and if it really boosts their health overall. Sea urchins aren't exactly the Usain Bolts of the ocean. They move slowly by crawling with their tube feet and occasionally give themselves a little push with their spines. These little guys have just 5 teeth, which they use like a beak to scrape algae off rocks, which I'm pretty sure is the ocean's version of an all-you-can-eat buffet. But since all that scraping wears their teeth down, they're in a never-ending dental replacement program. Scallops are the underwater equivalent of the world's most confused security cameras, sporting up to 200 tiny eyes on their shells. These eyes are high-tech. They can even adjust their pupils to light. Instead of working like ours, scallop eyes have a unique setup. Light goes through a pupil, lens, 2 retinas, and then hits a mirror made of guanine crystals that reflects it back. Scientists were puzzled about how they see since their main retina often gets blurry light. But it turns out, scallops can change their pupil size by about 50%. Just don't expect them to do it in a hurry, as it takes a few minutes.
Now here's something really neat about orcas. They're expert hunters, and they do it in groups called pods. A pod can consist of up to 40 orcas, forming a very effective hunting team. Interestingly, there are distinct types of pods: resident and transient. Resident pods are more into fish, while transient pods have a taste for marine mammals. But no matter what type of pod they belong to, all orcas have one thing in common: they are master collaborators. They work together using smart hunting techniques that are often compared to the teamwork of wolf packs. Almost 95% of jellyfish's body is made of water. For comparison, the human body is 60% water. It's probably not a surprise since jellyfish don't have a heart, blood, eyes, or brain. The other 5% of their body weight is proteins, muscles, and nerve cells. Jellyfish have been around for more than 500 million years. This makes them older than dinosaurs. These creatures haven't changed much, and today's jellyfish are pretty much like their ancestors. Electric eels have small eyes that are not so effective in environments with no light, so they mostly rely on their electric organs. Those consist of 6,000 cells. Eels use them to stow power, similar to batteries. These creatures use electricity like bats use their radars or dolphins their sonar. An eel can also produce enough electricity to power a panel of light bulbs. There's a small tropical archer fish that can learn to recognize human faces. This fish has an interesting ability to spit small jets of water from its mouth. Researchers showed the fish the image of 2 different faces placed side by side. One was unknown and the other was familiar. The fish was supposed to spit water at the familiar one. The creature took the right guess more than 80% of the time. There's such a thing as a sea unicorn. That's an animal called the narwhal. Its horn is actually a tooth that can grow up to 10 feet long. Manatees, also known as sea cows, are distant relatives of elephants. Their weight can go up to 1,000 pounds. These creatures are vegetarian and need to eat around 10% of their total weight on a daily basis. That's lots of sea salad. In some cases, manatees share space with alligators, but they get along pretty well. You can even find a photo from Florida where an alligator rides a manatee's back. Frogfish have special fins that help these creatures walk along the sand. They're very useful in shallow waters. A ghost pipefish is hard to see, but once you spot it, you're bound to get really surprised. Its head makes up over 40% of its body. Crabs don't feel like wasting time on such formalities as putting foods in their mouth. That's why they taste it with their feet, which is where their taste buds are. Marine iguanas are the only lizards on our planet that like spending time in the ocean, even though they mainly live on land. They're herbivores that feed in shallow waters and swim like snakes. Iguanas use their long claws to hold onto the bottom when they need to graze. Green turtles can cross over 1,400 miles when migrating. They try to find the perfect spot to lay their eggs. Penguins sort of fly when they're underwater, reaching a speed of 25 miles per hour. More than 5 million years ago, I've heard, I wasn't around then, deep-sea worms and humans had a common ancestor. So we still share 70% of our genes with these creatures, and with sea stars, squid, and octopuses. Now, octopuses are in fact incredibly old. The oldest known fossil belongs to an animal that lived almost 300 million years ago. FYI, this is before our dinosaur buddies roamed the Earth. Wait, there's more! Octopus arms have a mind of their own. That's because 2/3 of their neurons lie in their arms, not in their heads. This means that their arms can problem solve how to open a shellfish, while their owner is worried about other stuff entirely. Talk about ninja-level multitasking. Oh, and like other animals, such as chimpanzees and dolphins, octopuses have proven to be good at maneuvering tools, like picking up old shells and using them as a temporary home. Now, of course, the most intelligent animals on our planet are humans, according to humans. But we don't seem to give pigs enough credit. Pigs are so smart they can play video games. No, not Minecraft. But in a recent academic study, scientists had 4 pigs play a joystick game. They had to manipulate the stick so that the moving ball would hit the wall and then they would get a treat. All 4 pigs did great in the test, which was surprising even to the scientists. Now, pigeons also aced an impressive test. They were trained to differentiate a Picasso painting from a Monet one, which they had no trouble learning. Then they were able to apply this knowledge, identifying works of art they had not previously seen, meaning they really understood the difference between each painter. Poor things are always seen as a nuisance. Now, if we placed kangaroos in an animal's most amazing ability contest, they'd win. It's mainly because they break the four-legged rule. A special species of kangaroo, the red kangaroo, uses its tail to help propel it forward. Now, visually, it has 4 limbs, but in practice, it uses 5. They're biologically built to use their tail as a 5th limb, since it's packed with articulated vertebrae and thick muscles. Of course, it had to be an Australian animal. Deep within the Sahara Desert, you'll find a little creature known as the fennec fox. This huge-eared animal adapted perfectly to survive in its hostile environment. The huge ears help them to dissipate the unbearable heat of the desert, as well as help them to hunt for underground prey. Now meet this guy. Unlike what its name might suggest, the red panda is closer to a raccoon than it is to a giant panda. You'll find a lot of these cat-sized creatures in the Himalayan region, hopping from tree to tree and bundled together trying to keep warm in the harsh weather. They're gentle and friendly like their big panda cousins, and occasionally enjoy eating some bamboo sticks. And then there are bees. Compared to humans, bees' brains are the size of pinheads, yet they are capable of astounding things. Let's say a bee is running low on energy after a long search flight. This bee desperately needs a drop of honey in order to continue flying, but smartly enough, she doesn't need to go back to the hive to recharge. She can ask a fellow beehive mate for a drop of honey directly from this other bee's stomach and continue flying. This type of decentralized system allows them to build highly effective societies, one that bees don't need to push the queues in front of the honey cells, for example. Every year in the winter, great white sharks that live along the California coastline disappear. It feels as if they take a vacation for 30 to 40 days. The animals go to a point halfway between Hawaii and Mexico. They might do it to get some food, relax, or hang out with their buddies from other areas. The spot is now called the Whale Shark Cafe. Some types of sharks, like makos, whale sharks, or white sharks, breathe in a very specific way. It requires them to swim all the time. They also need to move quickly and with their mouth open. This way, the oxygen can enter and reach their gills. Sea sponges are some of the most primitive animals. They're immobile, don't have a mouth, eyes, bones, brain, heart, lungs, or any other organ whatsoever. And still, they're alive. There's such a thing as a sea unicorn. That's an animal called the narwhal. Its horn is actually a tooth that can grow up to 10 feet long. Manatees, also known as sea cows, are distant relatives of elephants. Their weight can go up to 1,000 pounds. These creatures are vegetarian and need to eat around 10% of their total weight on a daily basis. That's lots of sea salad. In some cases, manatees share space with alligators, but they get along pretty well. You can even find a photo from Florida where an alligator rides a manatee's back. Frogfish have special fins that help these creatures walk along the sand. They're very useful in shallow waters. A ghost pipefish is hard to see, but once you spot it, you're bound to get really surprised. Its head makes up over 40% of its body. Crabs don't feel like wasting time on such formalities as putting foods in their mouth. That's why they taste it with their feet, which is where their taste buds are. Marine iguanas are the only lizards on our planet that like spending time in the ocean, even though they mainly live on land. They're herbivores that feed in shallow waters and swim like snakes. There's something known as the orange cat behavior, and apparently it's not just a meme. So far, scientists have been able to understand that coat color is connected to a feline's gender. And since orange is an X chromosome, orange cats are usually males, like Garfield. The so-called orange cat behavior describes ginger cats as agents of chaos. Again, pretty much like Garfield. However, there haven't been any conclusive studies on whether coat color and cat behavior are truly linked. In terms of vision, mantis shrimps probably have the most psychedelic vision out of all animals. These funny-looking creatures have a whopping 16 varieties of photoreceptors, with 5 of them reserved for the ultraviolet or UV spectrum. Ultraviolet rays are really short wavelengths, which are invisible to humans. The thing science still doesn't understand is how exactly these mantis shrimp view the world around them. Sure, they can perceive a bunch of colors, but they can't necessarily distinguish all of these colors among themselves. It can be that they just see a lot of really vivid, really blurry colors, but we haven't figured out a way to check that out. Now, to say sloths are cute is an understatement. They may be one of the friendliest animals in the jungle, but there's more. If you look closely at their fur coat, you'll notice hints of green. These greeneries are actually tiny little algae that grow alongside sloths. They help sloths to camouflage better in the jungle, but they also nurture them. The little cracks inside a sloth's fur create the perfect environment for algae reproduction, and scientists have found species of algae that don't exist anywhere else in the world. They do get by with a little help from their friends. Deep within the Sahara Desert, you'll find a little creature known as the fennec fox. This huge-eared animal adapted perfectly to survive in its hostile environment. The huge ears help them to dissipate the unbearable heat of the desert, as well as help them to hunt for underground prey.
There's a creature somewhere deep in the ocean looking for prey that would make Dracula himself proud. It's been around since before even the dinosaurs walked the earth. It has no bones or jaw, but it doesn't stop this underwater vampire from hunting. The name of this eel-like parasite is the Pacific lamprey. The English monarch loved this fish so much that he defied doctors' orders to stop eating lamprey flesh. He got sick every time he'd have the original gooey fish. But the lack of bones and the fact that this lamprey tastes like slow-cooked beefsteak made the royal fall in love with the fish once and for all. The product of this love was a chill in his aged body, some heavy sweating, and some other scary symptoms, which eventually took his life and interrupted his 35-year reign. The lamprey is way better at surviving, as it lived through at least 4 mass extinctions. Its ancient ancestors evolved over 450 million years ago. There are around 40 living species of lampreys still thriving across the world. The Pacific lamprey is just one of them. These creatures have cartilage instead of bones, and a third eye, which is a special light-sensing organ on the top of their heads. Instead of a regular jaw, they have a sucker mouth surrounded by teeth. It's perfect for latching onto prey and sipping up body fluids like underwater vampires. Once they pick a victim, they suction it, making a seal that's almost impossible to break. Scientists believe the Pacific lampreys don't munch on flesh. Female lampreys lay up to 200,000 eggs in nests that stay in fresh water for 3 to 4 weeks. Once the larvae hatch, they burrow into sediment and stay under the sand for up to a decade. When they hit their teenage years, these miniature Draculas re-emerge and migrate from freshwater all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This journey isn't the easiest, and it takes some changes to its appearance and physiology to adapt to a huge change in salinity. After several years, they go back to freshwater to reproduce. Pacific lampreys can use chemical clues released by their larval migrating pals to find their way. They can travel hundreds of miles inland to find the perfect spot for spawning and rearing. It's not always the same place they spawned in. Many species of birds, mammals, and other fish can appreciate the fatty flesh of lamprey. This makes them some of the most valuable players in freshwater and marine ecosystems. Another lamprey type, the sea lamprey, is native to the Atlantic Ocean. It's not that dangerous when it's at home. But once it gets to the Great Lakes, it becomes a real threat to the 4 local native species of lamprey. The sea lamprey is up to 4 times bigger than the lake species. It has unlimited food and spawning grounds, and no natural predators here, so it becomes cocky. It secretes an enzyme that doesn't let the blood clot. Once it attaches to some unsuspecting fish, it spends the next several months feeding off of it. And even if the fish shakes the lamprey off, it doesn't have long to live because the mark the predator leaves behind. Sea lampreys aren't interested in humans, but can accidentally latch onto a swimmer. It won't be fatal, but it's not the most pleasant sensation, and you need to get the spot of the impact disinfected. The Australian box jellyfish looks harmless, but it's considered the most venomous marine animal. Unlike other kinds of jellyfish that float with the current rather than swim, this creature can reach an impressive speed and choose its own direction. It has tentacles covered with tiny darts loaded with poison. People and animals that get unlucky enough to meet with those tentacles face some scary and sometimes even fatal consequences in a matter of minutes. Before you decide to never revisit the ocean, you should know that only a few out of around 50 existing species of box jellyfish have venom that is lethal to humans. There are some not-so-dangerous species living in warm coastal waters worldwide. And the most dangerous ones are in the Indo-Pacific region and northern Australia. A blue-ringed octopus spots a signature psychedelic color and the ability to take away your life. This cute-looking sea monster likes to spend its time in the soft, sandy bottom or shallow tide pools and coral reefs. It normally hides in underwater crevices, among shells or debris. If you disturb it, the octopus will activate its tiny color-changing organs and demonstrate its blue rings as a warning signal. The next step will be releasing a venom 1,000 times more powerful than cyanide. This venom is more toxic than that of land mammals. The octopus normally uses it to hunt crabs, shrimp, and small fish by pecking them with its beak and paralyzing them. There is no known antidote for the venom, so if you ever see this sea creature, the best you can do is to stay away from it. It bites without any pain, so you might notice when it's too late. The good news is that it's not aggressive and won't go after you unless it's cornered. The reef stonefish are masters of disguise in the underwater world that camouflage themselves on rocks, coral reefs, or just blend into the seabed. They thrive throughout tropical marine waters of the Indo-Pacific. Their invisibility superpower makes them especially dangerous to their prospective victims they ambush and swallow whole. If someone happens to disturb them, their 13 defensive dorsal spines stand on end and deliver a powerful venom punch. They say stonefish stings are extra painful and lead to scary consequences within minutes. They're called the most venomous fish in the world. If you don't do anything about it, the impact can be lethal. If you ever go diving in the Pacific Ocean, be careful not to pick up a cone snail from the seafloor. It has a beautiful shell made of brown, black, or white patterns. Like most other snails, it's slow, but it has a complicated system of seeking out prey. It likes to snack on fish, marine worms, or even other snails. Once a cone snail senses food is near, it activates a sharp proboscis, or a needle-like protrusion from its mouth. The attack is swift and super potent. The victim doesn't even have time to realize what happened to them. Once it's completely incapable of moving, the cone snail swallows it whole. Humans aren't on its menu, but it can still release the venom if someone steps on it or disturbs it. The proboscis can even penetrate gloves. Luckily, only several out of over 700 species of cone snails can take a human's life. But since there's no antivenom, you better not risk it. All 52 known species of sea snakes living mostly in the warm tropical waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans are venomous. The beaked sea snake even has the title of one of the world's most venomous serpents, but it's one of the few kinds that can pose a real threat to humans. Sea snakes prefer a peaceful coexistence and would rather slither away than engage in any confrontations. If you ever see them in the water, staying calm and moving slowly will save your life. Sea snake bites, although almost painless at the moment, can have varying degrees of impact. Some may only cause mild symptoms, while others can lead to severe outcomes. Most bite reports come from accidental encounters, like someone freeing them from nets or unsuspecting beachgoers stepping on them. Blue dragons rarely grow larger than the size of a grape. They like to swim belly up, so their brightest blues blend in with the ocean waters. And the silver front faces down and camouflages with the darker seabed. Blue dragons feed on another dangerous sea creature and store up their stinging cells. Their venom lives on even after the fish itself is no longer alive. That's why you should be extra careful and never pick up or step on them on the beach.
Movies, TV series, and documentaries show us basically two situations. You get on a cruise ship and set out on a sea voyage, and during a storm, the vessel sinks. The good news is you survive. The bad news is you're in the middle of the sea. Another situation is that you're flying on an airplane. Something goes wrong, the engines catch fire, and the plane crashes into the ocean. Water surrounds you, and you don't know what to do. In both cases, you have a high chance that rescuers will save you. Flight controllers quickly find out that a plane has crashed into the sea. The same applies to large ships. Modern navigation and communication methods help rescuers find you quickly, especially if several people get in trouble. But let's imagine another, more terrible situation. Let's say you are at a seaside resort and tell your friends you want a snack. You go to the beach, buy some food, and decide to have lunch in the open sea. You rent a catamaran or a small boat, sail away from the shore, and fall asleep. Intense heat wakes you up, and you find yourself in the middle of the sea. You have no idea where the shore is and how long you've been here. Fortunately, you have a phone, but the bad news is that it's run out of battery. At this point, you may start to panic, and no matter how corny it sounds, don't do that. Boundless waters from all sides can make you nervous. Feeling like a little particle in a giant sea can cause existential horror. But you have to understand that panic will only make things worse. You have to keep your sanity and think clearly. To begin with, you're in an advantageous position because you have a boat. Some people get stuck at sea with nothing, so you have a better chance of surviving. By the way, if you're in the water without a boat, but you have pants, then you can easily make a life jacket. Just tie 2 pant legs in a knot. After that, start splashing water with your hand, making air bubbles so that the resulting air gets inside the pants. After that, grab the upper part tightly to prevent the air from escaping and put them around your neck. Now you have an air vest. Okay, back to you, stuck on a boat in the sea. You don't have pants, only a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. In addition, you have the remains of a burrito and some water in a bottle. Please don't drink it all at once. Try to make it last as long as possible. And it's also important not to drink seawater. Salt in it will cause even more intense thirst and trouble for your organism. You need to collect fresh water from the rain. Keep the bottle open and let your clothes get wet. The important point is that if you've swum in the sea wearing these clothes, they're covered with a thin layer of salt. So first, let your t-shirt get soaked by rainwater, then squeeze it to wash off all the salt, and only after that use your clothes to collect fresh liquid. Great, you have a whole bottle of fresh water. Take small sips several times daily, and you will have enough for a week. Now you need to get some fish. The good news is that sea creatures have approached you. The boat attracts the attention of marine life. They come to you out of curiosity or to use the boat as shelter. All you have to do now is catch lunch. If you're wearing shoes, use laces or tear off a piece of fabric from your clothes to make a small rope. Attach a piece of your burrito or any object to the rope's end and start fishing. Now you have food and water and nothing to worry about. Except for sharks. Bright colors or a drop of blood in the sea attract these hunters. You can scare them away by screaming and hitting your hands on the water. Make more noise. You will scare the fish, and they will understand that they have come across not a defenseless seal, but a very dangerous beast. A human. Yes, a fight with a shark sounds like something out of science fiction movies, but if you have nothing to lose, it's better to hit it on the nose than to swim away in panic. So you have fish, water, and authority. Life is good, but you're missing something. Oh yes, you need to get to dry land to survive. You can also attract the attention of an airplane or a passing ship. It's okay if you don't have a signal rocket. Your phone will help rescuers notice you. Use the mirror panel of your device to reflect sunlight and use the beam as a signal. There's a high probability that people on a ship passing by or even pilots of a plane flying by will see it. Keep your phone ready so as not to miss the rescuers. By the way, many boats have flares and life jackets with glowing signals under the seats. Use them at night and people will see you from afar. Unfortunately, there's no such thing on your tourist boat, so the phone is your only way to indicate yourself. You need to start navigating the sea if you don't see anyone who could save you. If you don't see the shore, look at the water. It takes a lighter shade in shallow water, so if you see something like this next to the boat, move in that direction. Also, pay close attention to the direction of waves. They are heading towards the shore. Look at the sky. If you notice a group of gulls or other birds, follow them. Sooner or later, they will lead you to the beach. But the main landmark in the open sea is the sun. It always rises in the east and sets in the west. At noon, it shines strictly from the south if you're in the northern hemisphere. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, the sun is in the north in the middle of the day. Focusing on these signs will let you understand your location and move toward the shore. But what if you still have no idea which way to go? Try to imagine a morning in your hotel. Remember where the sun was and in what position you were relative to it. For example, if you were standing on the balcony and saw the sun rising to the right of your windows, you were facing south. Being in the open sea, imagine the direction of your hotel or house relative to the morning sun, and then move in that direction. There are other signs pointing toward the shore. If the water becomes muddy, it means that somewhere nearby, a river flows into the sea. Move along this muddy water. The greenish tint under the clouds shows that they are above the land. So, you've already been drifting for several days and have finished all your water supplies. At some point, you hear the screams of seagulls. You look up and see where they are flying. You follow them and notice some muddy water. You're hungry, exhausted, and thirsty, but happy because you know the shore is ahead. As night falls, you notice city lights in the distance. By the morning, you reach the land and return to your hotel. There are many chances for salvation, but you can only use them if you observe one condition. Keep calm from the very beginning. People have survived after several weeks and even a year of being stuck in the open sea. Some were floating on a broken vessel, an inflatable boat, or a ship's wreckage. And every time, the desire for life, willpower, and faith helped them handle it.
Most of the ocean is still shrouded in mystery, whether we're talking about dark corners or creatures that are hiding in the depths. But sometimes, it gives us a peek into scary things it hides in its cold, dark depths. Like when you hear on the news that there are some deep-sea creatures washed ashore after a powerful storm once again. Some just look weird, while others are real monsters that live at depths of more than 3,300 feet. The coldest and deepest parts of the ocean have created one specific phenomenon called gigantism. So, sea spiders, squids, worms, and many other animals, mostly invertebrates, or creatures without backbones, they're all way bigger and scarier than the versions we see in the more shallow areas. In the Pacific depths, you can see a sea sponge as large as a minivan. Or what about the colossal squid that lives in sub-Antarctic waters and is nearly 14 times longer than the arrow squid, a type that mostly lives in New Zealand? Researchers found many of these underwater monsters in the abyssal zone of the ocean. Back in 2021, the researchers showed images of the giant phantom jelly. It was at a depth of 3,200 feet. Its tentacles were 33 feet long. Wow, I wouldn't like to face that one on the beach. It probably eats only small fish and plankton, but it can swim to depths of more than 21,900 feet. And down there, this giant jelly doesn't have enough food. How does it survive then? Scientists haven't figured it out yet. And there are even more questions related to the giant squid, the biggest one ever found. This monster is 43 feet long, with a weight of nearly a ton. Imagine if those tentacles would grab your car, or something like that. They would smash it like it was a toy. There's no light in the abyssal zone. Sun rays just can't penetrate that deep. So there's no algae or underwater plants there. Local animals mostly eat snow. Marine snow is not like the regular one you build a snowman with. It consists of any small flakes or remains that fall from the surface of the ocean. Maybe even some leftovers that animals up there couldn't eat. So it's not much. But apparently, it's enough for very large creatures that hide deep down there, like giant squids. Squids that generally live at such depths don't bother going after their prey. They just wait until the poor animal swims right up to their long tentacles and falls into a trap. It may not be the best method ever, because not many animals will even swim into these dark, cold parts. But it's the method that saves energy. A giant squid eats only 1 ounce of fish daily, which is approximately 45 calories. That's nearly 50 times fewer calories than an average person should eat per day. So when a squid gets 1 fish, it saves it for a couple of days. I hope giant squids won't get the idea to go to the surface and look for food when there's not enough of it in the abyssal zone. And I hope even more that giant Greenland sharks won't get that same idea. You can find them at depths of up to 7,200 feet. They're twice as slow as we usually walk. They swim at a speed of 1.12 feet per second. Their slowness is part of the energy-saving mechanism that creatures down there need to survive. But they can speed up in the form of short bursts when they need to catch prey. But they kinda change their diet from predator to scavenger, considering their environment. There will be more leftovers falling from the surface than animals to go after. Greenland sharks grow just 0.4 inches per year, and they're mostly 20 feet long, which means they live for a very long time, sometimes up to 400 years. They also have a slow metabolism, and that's one of the main factors for their long life, too. Greenland sharks like to spend their time in cold waters. They're adapted to that, since their tissues have specific chemical compounds that prevent the forming of ice crystals all over their body. That means they have some sort of natural antifreeze. So what makes them so big? Scientists are still not sure, but some theories try to explain it. There's this thing called Kleiber's rule that says bigger animals tend to be more efficient. Just take a small fish and compare it to a whale with a mass hundreds of times bigger. The whale has a greater metabolism. It conserves energy more efficiently and loses less of it to the surroundings through heat. Moving on, bigger animals can ingest bigger prey. They're more likely to go through tough issues in their environment or defend themselves from predators going after them. Also, the body gets bigger when temperatures are lower. The Greenland shark is a perfect example. So are giant sea spiders. Sea spiders are generally common, and you find some very small ones at 0.04 inches. But in deeper parts of the Antarctic, they become 3-foot-long giants. They grow so big because the cold water has more oxygen. That way, more of it diffuses into the animal's body, and that allows it to grow bigger. Yeah, both as a creature and a nightmare. And how about this giant tube worm? Researchers found it accidentally while they were exploring the mysteries of the Pacific Ocean floor. They stumbled upon unusual hydrothermal vents. Volcanic heat is a thing that gets them going. As water seeps down through faults or cracks in the rock, these vents change their direction. When the water gets out of the vent, it's rich in different minerals and chemicals. Most animals wouldn't survive being around this toxic soup of chemicals, but not these tube worms. They came as a true surprise, because not only are they not bothered by these toxic vents and the almost boiling temperature of the water, but they developed entire ecosystems there. They're unique because they don't need sunlight to survive. Instead, small bacteria are their main source of energy. That bacteria gets their energy directly from these toxic chemicals. So it's not photosynthesis, but a process called chemosynthesis. And these tube worms don't have mouths. These bacteria live inside them. Strange story, huh? Plus, these scary worms reach up to 8 feet. Giant isopods are no better either. They lurk at the depths of the ocean of 1,640 feet or more below, far away from the sunlight, looking like some monstrous wood lice. They spend most of their time on the seabed, hoping to find some food falling from higher levels of the ocean. Check out their small hooked claws at the ends of their legs. Isopods use them to remain more stable while moving around the ocean floor. Since there's no light, they have long antennae that help them feel their way around. These sensory antennas are about half the length of their body. Giant isopods have pretty big eyes compared to their body size, too. They can grow over 12 inches from head to tail. And these fellas are really patient. Remember how we said animals down there rarely get food? Sometimes they need to wait for years to get a proper meal. That's why their metabolism is amazingly slow.
5 years later.
They can go for 5 years without eating anything. Imagine that. I get hungry just talking about this. In 2006, a biologist did research to compare the differences between the shallows and the deep sea regions. He realized the deep sea mirrors the island rule. First, isolated parts of land develop biodiversity you won't find anywhere else. Second, small-bodied life there grows much bigger when it's isolated, compared to life on large land masses. Resources are limited, but also competition and predators. And we don't know much about these deep-sea creatures. It's too expensive and too complicated to carry out such research, so we'll just wait for more raging storms to show us at least part of the monstrous world cold ocean depths hide.